Somewhere on this planet, behind unmarked walls and layers of corporate silence, a machine the size of a school bus is printing circuits onto silicon at a scale too small to see, too precise to comprehend, and too important to ignore. The nation that controls this machine, and the dozens like it, controls the foundation of artificial intelligence, the speed of modern warfare, and the trajectory of the next 50 years of human civilization. This is not a story about computers. This is a story about power.
I'm standing outside a facility that officially doesn't invite visitors. They say it's inactive, but something's happening here.
There's no sign on the building with a company name. The road leading here has been repaved recently.
The perimeter fence is recent construction, taut steel mesh, cameras every 30 meters. My escort from the communications office walked me to a point about 40 meters from the main entrance. They told me this was as far as I could go without a clearance level I don't have. What I can see from here, a row of cooling towers venting white steam into a gray sky, and a loading dock and a building so sealed and so internally pressurized that even the emergency exit doors appear to be positively reinforced against the outside world.
Inside facilities like this one, tens of billions of dollars have been poured into a manufacturing process so sensitive that a single human hair, invisible from 10 feet away, would be enough to destroy a production run worth millions of dollars. The technology being built here powers everything from the largest language models to the targeting systems on next-generation military hardware. It is, without exaggeration, the most consequential industrial process operating on Earth today, and most people have never heard of it.
I've been granted access to a secondary briefing corridor. Not the clean room itself, but the anteroom leading to it. The air here is already different. It's noticeably drier, and there's a faint directional pressure, a positive airflow pushing outward through every door frame. A technician in a full bunny suit is passing through the airlock at the far end of the corridor. The suit is white, head to toe, with a transparent visor. He's carrying nothing. His hands are gloved in 2 layers. The airlock cycles him through in about 4 to 5 seconds. First, a pressure equalization, then a pass through an ionized air curtain that strips static charge from the surface of the suit. I can hear the faint mechanical hiss of the seal engaging. Then the inner door opens, and he disappears into a yellow-lit space beyond.
That yellow light is not decorative. It is photolithographic protection. The photosensitive chemicals used to etch circuit patterns onto silicon wafers react to specific wavelengths of light. Standard white light would destroy them. So entire sections of the most advanced chip factories in the world operate under filtered illumination, casting everything in amber and gold, giving these spaces the visual character of a place that exists slightly outside of ordinary reality, which, in a meaningful sense, they do. The process that happens inside these rooms, wafer fabrication, is not well understood by the public. It begins with silicon, the second most abundant element in the Earth's crust, purified to a degree that produces material purer than almost anything found in nature. That silicon is grown into cylindrical ingots, sliced into wafers thinner than a human fingernail, and then subjected to a sequence of more than 1,000 individual manufacturing steps, each one building or removing microscopic layers of material with tolerances measured in atoms.
Through the glass partition, I can see the fabrication floor. It is enormous, TA. The scale only registers when you notice the transport pods moving along overhead rails, ferrying sealed cassettes of wafers between processing stations. The robots don't rush. They move with the mechanical certainty of systems that have no tolerance for error. Below them, the floor is immaculate. There are no shadows under the workstations because the lighting is engineered to eliminate them. The technicians' turret, and there are dozens visible from where I'm standing you, move in a choreography that looks spontaneous, but is
The most critical machine in this entire complex, in any advanced chip factory, is the EUV lithography system, extreme ultraviolet lithography. There is, at this moment, only one company in the world that builds them. That company is ASML, headquartered in the Netherlands. Each machine costs approximately $200 million. Each machine weighs roughly 180 tons. Each machine requires 40 freight containers and 20 specialized cargo aircraft to ship, and each machine is capable of printing circuit features at a scale of just a few nanometers, a unit of measurement so small that 2,000 of them fit across a single strand of DNA. There are fewer than 100 of these machines currently operational on the planet. The waiting list to acquire one stretches years into the future, and the export of this machine, its sale to certain countries, is now explicitly controlled by the governments of the United States, Japan, and the Netherlands under coordinated trade restrictions that represent one of the most consequential pieces of industrial policy in modern history.
One of the engineers agreed to walk me through the general layout of the lithography section glowed through glass from a distance. He pointed to a sealed chamber roughly the length of a city bus. Inside, the technology is changing everything. Surrounded by support systems, vacuum pumps, laser power units, thermal stabilization arrays. He described the inside as a near-perfect vacuum. The EUV light source turret, generated by firing a high-powered laser at a droplet of molten tin 50,000 times per second min, produces light at a wavelength of just 13.5 nanometers. That light is then reflected off a series of mirrors polished to extraordinary tolerances, equivalent to smoothing the entire surface of Earth to within a few millimeters. When I asked him what happens if one of those mirrors shifts by even a fraction of a degree, he looked at me for a moment and said, "Everything stops."
Yield. That is the word that keeps semiconductor executives awake at night. Yield is the percentage of chips on a given wafer that actually work. In early production stages, it can be catastrophically low. Getting it above 90% is an art form that takes years of process refinement and materials science. A 1% improvement in yield across a full production run translates into hundreds of millions of dollars. A yield collapse, triggered by contamination, a miscalibrated machine, or a subtle chemical impurity, can halt production for days and erase quarterly earnings in a single event.
Down a restricted corridor to my left is what the facility calls the Metrology wing. I'm not allowed in, but the door has a small viewport and a sign indicating Class 1 cleanliness, TOR. That's 1 particle per cubic foot of air. For context, a standard hospital operating room runs at about 10,000 particles per cubic foot. What I can see through the viewport is a single technician seated before an electron microscope array. On the screen in front of her is an image of a wafer surface magnified to a scale where individual circuit structures are visible as raised geometric forms. She's measuring. She's comparing. She's looking for deviations measured in picometers, PM, 1 trillionth of a meter. I watched her for about 2 minutes. She didn't move from the screen once.
The geopolitical dimension of all of this cannot be overstated. The global semiconductor supply chain is one of the most concentrated and fragile systems in the modern economy. A single company, TSMC, as the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, produces the majority of the world's most advanced chips. It operates in a place that two of the world's largest military powers contest as sovereign territory. Were that production capability to be interrupted by natural disaster, by political crisis, by conflict, the economic shock would register across every major economy on Earth within weeks. This is why governments are spending hundreds of billions of dollars to build new chip factories on their own soil. The United States with the CHIPS Act, the European Union with its own semiconductor initiative, Japan rebuilding domestic capacity, China working against export restrictions, pouring resources into indigenous development of every part of the supply chain it has been denied. This is an arms race. The weapons are measured in nanometers. The battlefield is the fab floor.
I've been walked out to the utility yard on the north side of the building to town. It's accessible without full clearance teal. And what I'm seeing here gives you some physical sense of the scale of what's happening inside. There are 12 industrial chillers arranged in a row, each the size of a shipping container, cooling the water systems that regulate temperature inside the fab. Beside them, 3 natural gas turbines serving as backup power infrastructure roar. Because of power interruption inside the fab, even underground pipes carry ultra-pure water more chemically clean than any water that occurs in Nature Bell, from a treatment facility at the eastern edge of the property. This single building consumes more water per day than a small city. It consumes more electricity than some mid-sized towns. And it operates 24 hours a day, every day of the year, because the machines cannot simply be switched off.
Water, electricity, rare gases, exotic chemicals, specialized robotics. The semiconductor supply chain doesn't start with a silicon wafer. It starts with neon harvested from steel plants in Ukraine, with fluorine compounds from a handful of global facilities, with cobalt and hafnium sourced from geologically specific deposits on multiple continents, with photoresist chemicals produced by Japanese companies whose names most Western investors have never encountered. Every one of these inputs is a potential choke point. Every choke point is a vulnerability. And every vulnerability is now mapped by governments and defense ministries who understand, with a clarity the public does not share, that the chip factory is not just an industrial facility. It is a strategic asset of the first order.
In the packaging hall, Rampur, the only section I've been allowed to enter with a full escort to, but the atmosphere is different from the main fab. It's calmer, quieter in a human sense, though the machines are still running. Here, completed silicon dies are being mounted onto substrates, wire bonded or flip chipped with connections thinner than a human hair, encapsulated in resin, marked, sorted, binned by performance tier, and prepared for shipment. A conveyor system moves sealed trays through a series of automated inspection stations. At one station, a robotic arm picks individual packages from a tray, holds each one for 0.3 seconds under an optical array, then routes it left or right based on a verdict that no human in the room is directly watching. The pass rate, I'm told, is above 98%. The 2% that fail are not discarded food. They're reanalyzed to understand why.
The final test is not the end. It is the beginning of the feedback loop that makes semiconductor manufacturing competitive. Every data point from every failed chip, every yield deviation, every microscopic defect is fed back into process control systems that adjust deposition parameters, etch chemistry, photo mask alignment, and cleaning protocols in real time. A modern semiconductor fab generates more data per day than most large companies generate in a year. The analysis of that data, increasingly powered by artificial intelligence, is itself one of the competitive advantages that separates the manufacturers who can sustain leading-edge production from those who cannot. It is a recursive system. AI makes better chips make faster AI, the loop accelerates.